Alright, hi again. This video it's going to be comparing the Constellation 0 Xiao with the Constellation 6 Xiao to see the difference and to see if it's actually worth pulling for a C6 Xiao. But yeah, let's get right into it. Okay, so first things first, we'll look at Xiao's stats. So he currently is level 90. He has 19,300 HP. He has 2,300 attack, 800 and almost around 850 defense, 40 elemental mastery, which I feel like elemental mastery is not necessary for Xiao, since he can be almost like an overpowered Anemo DPS. Okay, he has 68.8 crit rate, 157.3 crit damage, 133% energy recharge, and 61.6 Anemo damage bonus. Okay, next thing we're gonna look at is his weapon. It's level 90. At the time of recording the comparison, his polearm was at rank 1. So don't worry about all these extra stats. Yeah, it will not be contributing to the comparison. Next is his artifacts. So you can see I'm running a 2-piece Viridescent and a 2-piece Gladiator. And for the stats for it, this is the flower, the feather, the hourglass, which we don't really want to talk about, at least I don't want to talk about, because this is the only decent, supposedly decent hourglass, 5-star hourglass I was supposed to have, and things went downhill.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Anyways, the goblet and the hats. Okay, so we will look at his talents next. So, yeah. You can ignore all of these increased level talents because, again, this is recorded after the comparison. So the +3 did not play any role when doing a C0 test with Xiao. So his first talent, the Whirlwind Thrust. So this basically just tells you he can do 6 consecutive attacks. For his normal attack, his charge attack will use stamina and it will perform an upward thrust. His plunging attack is, basically just plunging down from the sky and doing AoE damage to enemies who are within it. His elemental skill is Nemescatic Wind Cycling.
Lemniscatic.
This is pretty straightforward as his elemental skill does Anemo damage to the enemies and can also be used while in mid-air. You will get 2 charges for it. His elemental burst is Bane of All Evil. This increases Xiao's jumping ability and the area of damage, as well as his attack, which is converted into Anemo damage at the cost of his HP. So his HP will continuously drain as long as his elemental burst is activated. But you can switch him out with another character and it will just be cancelled. Now his passive talent, his first one is Conqueror of Evil, Tamer of Demons. So every time you use his elemental burst, Xiao's damage will be increased by 5%. The damage will then continue to increase by 5% for every 3 seconds when using his elemental burst. The maximum amount of bonus damage is 25%. His second passive talent is Dissolution Eon, Heaven Fall. When using his elemental skill, it increases the damage of it by 15%. This effect lasts for 7 seconds and can have a maximum of 3 stacks. It will reset when your elemental skill is fully charged up again, meaning if you have 2 charges full and ready to go, or 3 charges if you have his Constellation 1. His final passive talent is Transcension, Gravity Defier. This will decrease your team's climbing stamina by 20%. Okay, so we're gonna do like a side-by-side comparison thing. So his C1 basically just gives you another elemental skill. You can see that his Constellation 0 only does 2 anemo charges. And his Constellation 1 can do 3 anemo charges. Next one is his C2, which is so when he's not on the field, so basically in your party while you're using like another character to fight, he will gain 25% more energy. For this test, we will see how long it takes for his elemental burst to fully charge with 2 teams. One without an anemo character and another with an anemo character. The team I'm showing right now is a Constellation 0 Xiao with no other anemo characters. It took him around 1 minute and 44 seconds to get his elemental burst out. This next one is the same thing but with a Constellation 2 Xiao. It took him around 1 minute and 23 seconds to get his elemental burst out. This one is a Constellation 0 Xiao with an anemo character on the team. It took him around 1 minute and 22 seconds to get his elemental burst out. This is the same thing but with a Constellation 2 Xiao. It took him around 1 minute and 16 seconds to get his elemental burst out. So his Constellation 3, it just increases his elemental skill by 3 levels. You will see that at Constellation 0, when he doesn't land a crit, he does around 6 to 7k damage. And when he lands a crit, he does around 19 to 20k damage. At Constellation 3, he does around 9k when he doesn't land a crit, and around 19 to 21k on a crit hit. Okay, now his C4 is when Xiao's HP basically like falls below 50%, he will gain like 100% defense bonus. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, so he just gains more defense so he doesn't die as fast. You can see at Constellation 0, he takes around 500 to 1000 physical damage. When it comes to elemental damage, he takes around 300 to 700 damage. At Constellation 4, when his health falls below 50%, he takes around 200 to 500 elemental damage, excluding reactions such as overload. If you noticed earlier, when he was at C0, you can see that overload does 1608 damage, and here the numbers didn't change. But I'm not really sure how this defense thing works, so don't quote me on that. His C5 just increases his elemental burst by 3 levels. At Constellation 0, when activating his elemental burst and doing normal attacks, he does around 3 to 12k damage. His charge attacks does around 16k, and his plunge attack does around 26 to 30k. At Constellation 5, his normal attack still only does around 3 to 12k damage. His charge attack does around 17k, and his plunge attack does around 27 to 32k. And finally, his Constellation 6. While he's using his elemental burst and doing the plunge attack, and it hits at least 2 enemies, it will basically give him an extra elemental skill without any cooldown. Like, it ignores all the cooldown. Like, if you used all of his elemental skills, all 3 of them, and you use his plunge attack while using the elemental burst, it will immediately give you an extra elemental skill to use. I know I kind of forgot to use his elemental skill, so it kind of ruined this clip, but the point being is that at Constellation 0, when he hits at least 2 enemies, his elemental skill won't immediately be recharged by 1. At Constellation 6, you will see how I hit multiple enemies, but my elemental skill did not recharge by 1. And in my theory, I think that is because it isn't his actual plunge attack that did the damage, but more of the spear that comes up from the ground when you hit the floor. So what I think is that you need to be directly below the enemy in order for the Constellation's 6 ability to work. Here is a better example for what Constellation 6 does. You can see how his elemental skill recharges every time he does the plunge attack. So my final conclusion, C6 Xiao is definitely very strong, and that's a no-brainer. I would say that his C2 and his C4 doesn't really seem to be too useful for me. As for C2, I usually have him out on the field fighting instead of sitting on the bench, so I won't benefit much from that 25% increased energy recharge. And as for his C4, I still end up dying a lot, even though it says it increases his defense by 100%, because every time I fight these elite bosses, sometimes I can only take like 2 to 3 hits before Xiao gets knocked out completely. As for free-to-play players, having him at C0 doesn't make him any less weak. He is still one of the strongest characters, and in my opinion, maybe the strongest 5-star I know. Though his energy recharge seems to lean towards the not so efficient side if you want to spam his elemental burst. But it can be worked around with if you have energy recharge as one of the substats in your artifacts. Otherwise, getting his C1 for some extra energy is another option, but it is not necessary. Anyways, that's the end of my C0 to C6 Xiao comparison video. And with that being said, I'll probably see you in the next video. Bye!